Hey, this is Mike Diercksen from Proactive, and you're listening to the Building Bite podcast. Tune in as we spotlight our guest, Patrick McBride, Head of Construction Property at Zurich North America. Our episode today is focused on demystifying parametric policies. For more information on this episode and others, please check out the Building Bite at www.buildwithproactive.com.
Welcome to the Building Bite Podcast, a podcast for construction contractors, owners, and insurance professionals, where you'll hear from the experts about key topics that will help you be successful. I'm Chris Epps, a Vice President with Proactive, and I'm joined here with my co-host Mike Diercksen, our Manager of Marketing and Business Development. We welcome back our guest today, a friend of the podcast, Patrick McBride. Patrick is the Head of Construction Property at Zurich North America. Patrick, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Chris. Thanks for the warm welcome and excited to be back on the podcast for my second time.
Awesome. We're happy to have you back and continue this conversation. Mike, how about yourself? How are you today?
Doing great, Chris. Always happy to have Patrick back on the podcast and excited to get rolling here.
Yeah, as I said, Patrick, such a pleasure to have you back on the show. While many of our guests probably remember your initial podcast and our last conversation, I was hoping you could give our listeners some insight into your background, career path, and kind of what led you to your role as head of construction property for Zurich North America.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. Thank you. So, I started my career actually with Zurich, was a product of the Zurich training program many years ago, but served as a construction property underwriter focused on the builder's risk lines of business, as well as contractors, property and inland marine programs, and various other first-party construction solutions. I actually left Zurich and went to Willis Towers Watson as a middle market broking leader, both in the South region and the Mid-Atlantic region, and was fortunate enough to move back to Zurich in a South regional leadership role focused on those same lines that I underwrote in the construction property space. I performed that role for roughly 3 years, and over the past over 3 years now, I've had the opportunity and the pleasure of serving as the head of construction property for Zurich North America, focused on portfolio management and leading the underwriting team for the master builder's risk, the project builder's risk platforms, our contractors, property and inland marine solutions, our operational civil product, and some fun new emerging products geared towards sustainability in the sustainable energy space, the mass timber construction space, and what I'm excited to talk about today, the new and evolving weather parametric space.
Yeah, so clearly you only do one or two things, Patrick, right? You don't have too many hats to wear, but no, it's you're such a wealth of knowledge here, and we appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. Before we go any further, and today's focus will be on the parametrics policy. Can you give our listeners a quick refresher on what the parametric policy incorporates and what it is?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there's a lot of conversation with evolving challenges, whether it's the existence and continued severity and frequency of natural catastrophe perils and or just changing weather perils. And so we see a lot of both brokers, carriers, other individuals in the insurance market talking about the evolution and kind of introduction of parametric solutions within the U.S. market. And really parametric for traditional underwriters like myself, we really have to turn off kind of some of those key aspects of how physical damage triggers under a property policy or a builder's risk policy, in that a parametric is really an umbrella term for an indexation type of cover where you build a parameter out of something that's modelable, easy for me to say, or measurable. And if that measurement criteria is met, then the policy pays without the need for there to be a physical damage trigger within the policy. So there's a number of types of different parametric solutions, whether it's pandemic or endemic solutions, whether it's cyber, terrorism, or weather, which is what Zurich's product is geared around, dealing with interruption or suspension due to a weather event on a construction project site. So it's a unique and new type of product offering that many are becoming more familiar with, but an alternative risk transfer mechanism to consider different types of exposures that might not be accessible or otherwise covered under a traditional property or builder's risk policy.
Yeah, and look, it's such an exciting. It's very rare that insurance we hear new, right? It's an old industry, it's an old product, but this is an exciting time for that. So, for our listeners, if you're going, what was all that? Don't worry, we're going to take a deeper dive here. So, the title of the episode today is Demystifying Parametric Insurance. So, Patrick, this is a topic that's going to register with our audience. I think it's going to be very useful for them to better understand. And maybe it hasn't picked up the mainstream attention yet, but that's why we're here today. So can you tell us, what are the best use cases for the parametric insurance, and how has it evolved since we last spoke several months ago?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So I really think a lot of individuals' minds go to natural catastrophe application for a parametric solution. And without a doubt, there are applications that make great sense for hurricanes, earthquakes, other large-scale weather events that parametric solution can provide an indemnity if a certain trigger level is met. However, the product that Zurich has really is dealing with and geared towards any type of weather that can happen or disrupt or interrupt any sort of construction project anywhere in the country. So really what the perils that we focus on when we originally had these conversations were the peril of rain, wind, heat, and cold. And our latest peril expansion has included the peril of snow. So as an example, if you think about rain, rain can disrupt and interrupt projects really at any point in time during that construction schedule. But if you take an example, say it's a large square footage warehouse that has a considerable amount of utility prep work, otherwise dirt work, and that foundational prep aspect during the first stages of the construction project, a routine, non-substantial rain event can create down days, dry out days, and things like that. So what a parametric solution can do if you gear, or is the concern is for the peril of something like rain, you set an indice, a target, if you will, say of 1 inch of rain, and if it rains more than 1 inch, regardless of whether there's actual physical damage to either time or material on the project, that policy can be inked in to trigger down days and cover things like the run rate of the project, contractors' labor and cost, equipment rental fees, general condition expenses, and things like that on behalf of the general contractor, and provide indemnity where otherwise there wouldn't be cover from traditional insurance. So it's really exciting to see some of the application and the change in the launch of snow for those types of projects that are exposed to snow in certain parts of the country, whether snow is expected and or unexpected. This type of solution can provide the access to indemnity, both from a GC or an owner's perspective, otherwise absence of traditional physical damage triggers.
Yeah, I think that was one thing I found interesting in looking at the policy, Patrick, was kind of how tailored, or I guess customizable, you can make it around each of those perils. And, that really, I think, helps guard your insureds against delays that, can really have a kind of a snowball effect on the project life cycle. So maybe if you could give us an example, kind of some of the successes you guys have seen, how does that work real time? How does it get implemented, and how are people using it?
Yeah, absolutely. So we launched the project in beginning of 2021, and it was really an interesting time period. We had actually performed a soft launch period at late 2020 with certain key clients. And as many recall, beginning of that year, the following year, we had Winter Storm Uri here in Texas, which interrupted basically the entire state due to severe cold, which interrupted the grid and it interrupted basically every single construction project in the entire state. So we had actually had a conversation with the general contractor who thought the product was interesting, thought there could be application, had actually mentioned that, every part of each owner contractor negotiation when it comes to weather delay days is a part of that conversation and negotiation, but wasn't interested, at the immediate time. Well, fast forward a couple months, they had an opportunity to enter into a new relationship with an owner that had a pipeline of business and it was working towards a very aggressive construction schedule for the new construction of a tilt wall warehouse. Well, that owner actually had suffered a lot of delays due to Winter Storm Uri, and we had the opportunity to reintroduce the product to that general contractor when actually that owner inked in a weather contingency liability clause within the policy that basically expressed after a certain number of days, regardless of the actual weather event, there would be some liability and some penalties due to the delay in the project. And the contractor asked us, hey, will this product actually provide some contractual risk transfer if we are subject to those weather delays? And we said, of course, and that ended up being one of our very first parametric solutions to put in, covered rain and wind for the course of that construction project. So Most of the wins that we've seen have been on the general contractor side. We've seen different types of projects. I mentioned tilt wall projects. We've also seen projects that are high-rise in nature that require considerable amount of underground work for projects going multi-stories underground, where groundwater prevention and just general water prevention is a challenge. So rain could cause delays in that scenario, and we've seen rain purchased on those types of solutions. And then we've also seen from the peril of wind, and don't think, kind of category 1 and up, 74 mile per hour up type events. We're talking more of, 20, 25 to 30 mile an hour average wind speed during the working day, which might not sound like a heavy wind speed trigger. But if you think about a tilt wall project that might have dual tandem lifts with 2 different cranes, there are certain OSHA requirements or general risk management safety requirements of not operating those cranes when wind speeds are over a certain amount. We've seen application in those types of projects as well. But also on the owner side, this product can also be purchased on behalf of the owner as well. We've seen a school district be interested in the purchase of it to protect different types of exposures. Obviously, the owner isn't going to have the general condition expense exposure, the labor cost for the individuals building the structure, but they do have some of those loss of business income, loss of rents potential, depending on the occupancy exposures if a project isn't done on time. So the particular example with the school was they were up against a hard date to finish a new school campus before the school season started. And if they didn't, they would be out a substantial amount of potential revenue. So they actually purchased a wind policy in order to protect any sort of delays that the contractor might be suffering, however, indemnified on behalf of the owner for those types of exposures. So the application has been different every single time. The conversation's been different, but the one thing that I think rings true is that every contractor has weather delay negotiations and exposure within a project, and otherwise simple delays, are not normally covered under a traditional policy. And this application could be a very unique thing to consider.
Yeah, it's kind of zooming into what might have been a small part of the conversation and expanding upon that and finding useful coverage, right? Yep. I think that winter storm you're talking about had the famous picture with the ceiling fan with that turned into an icicle coming out of it in Texas. So if people don't remember the storm for that reason, at least there's a great picture you can look up there. Yeah, and this is something I think it's easier to hear about these stories, fortunately, when it's someone else's story, not your own, right? So for our listeners listening in, how do you typically look to deploy this coverage, right? People may have had experiences like this or heard of other projects experiencing something like that. There's got to be a lot of overlap when it comes to the policies here. I'm thinking builder's risk in particular. So what does the deployment of that look like with the different lines?
Yeah, absolutely. So our product dovetails very closely with our builder's risk policy. It doesn't have to be purchased in tandem. However, it is written on a primary basis. So the expectation is that, if there's a triggering event that both causes a delay on the project under the parametric as well as physical damage, that the parametric solution would trigger first. So in a sense can provide aspects of deductible buy-down perspectives for things like elevated CAT deductibles, which are fairly customary for CAT-exposed projects, and or otherwise deductibles, as well as limit erosion from if the parametric responds as well. So there's an interesting dovetail between those two product lines, in addition to some of what is standard to some risks when it comes to delay and startup cover, which is that time element component of a builder's risk policy. Typically covers the owner's interest. That parametric solution can also dovetail for quicker indemnity and access to those future delays, which have to occur after a project effective date if delayed. And so there's also a claims benefit here as well in terms of time for claim payout as well under a parametric solution. Typically, it's a fairly scientific and mathematical approach in terms of, was there a weather event? Did it have an interruption or delay on the project, and did it exceed the trigger value? And if so, is yes. The idea is that the policy pays in a matter of weeks, as opposed to a large and complex property or builder's risk claim, which could take months to review, to identify third-party engineers to do the analysis, to go through the claims adjustment process. So there's also an aspect of quicker indemnity, which is a really interesting and advantageous component of that parametric solution as well.
Yeah, and I haven't met an insured yet that doesn't want to get to the money faster, when they do have trigger policy coverage for any type policies. So,
exactly.
It does sound like a very well coordinated product in terms of fitting together with your builder's risk coverage and really kind of diversifying and expanding that coverage. While I think our audience certainly will recognize some of the immediate impacts that the coverage provides, are there other benefits and maybe less profound or something they don't expect, that come with that coverage?
Yeah, absolutely. So the need and kind of the use, as I mentioned earlier, does evolve, but we've seen general contractors recognize this solution as a potential to become more competitive within their bids. So we've worked directly with senior leaders in the project estimation departments for certain general contractors who are working to include this type of solution in each and every bid. One, for their own protection from interruptions or suspensions of projects due to weather, but also two, back to that contractual negotiation of weather delay days. In most cases, I would imagine general contractors want more, flexibility from a weather delays, and owners want less, right? They want their project done as quick as possible. So being able, from a contractor's perspective, to accept potentially less days from a negotiation perspective, creating a potential or perceived or actual exposure can dovetail incredibly nicely with the solution that the parametric can provide from indemnity in order to accept those less waiting period or delay days contractually, therefore potentially making that bid more competitive. So there are some interesting competitive advantages for those interested in utilizing this, create a little more exposure from project delivery, however, ensuring that under a parametric solution.
And I have to imagine from a growth perspective, too, if you're a GC looking to expand into new regions that maybe you're a little less familiar with, as you're kind of maybe creeping to the Pacific Northwest, as an example, hey, there's a rain coverage here that we could implement that would help kind of CYA for those projects as well.
Absolutely. It's a wonderful product to consider for geographical expansion where experience might not be as strong outside of core scope geographies to deal with unexpected turns of weather or what we're all dealing with as we turn on the news every morning, right. The increasing frequency and severity of weather pretty much anywhere in the country. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Well, Patrick, as always, been an excellent discussion. We really thank you for your time and your expertise. As you know, on the show, we like to leave our audience with some takeaways. So what would be the 3 big takeaways that you would like to give to the audience, given this conversation we're having today?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway, and I think the opportunity the market has is really to lean in with curiosity and further desire to understand how a parametric solution works. I think a lot of individuals, at least that I speak to, have maybe heard of parametric or seen a podcast or potentially done some reading on different products that are available in the marketplace. But I'd really encourage brokers, whether it's Zurich or other parametric solution that are out there, to engage in the quotation process. One of the key benefits that our product brings is there is some hesitation in the market, of course, around what cost, and then of course education. So the product that we've built is from the ground up, small commercial to middle market, commercial minded and up. So we built a product that first and foremost, based on client feedback, is built around cost in mind. So having those conversations and not being fearful of what the cost could be, but really exploring and understanding how a solution could work on a project. So that would really be my number one takeaway is if I could say, less talk, more walk, if you will, and actually getting a hold of a quote and taking the opportunity to learn and how, for whether a general contracting organization or some sort of owner, exploring via the quotation process and being curious to learn how this new and unique solution in the market could impact their risk profile perspective. So that would be probably my number one, aspect. And then as we look to the future, obviously I mentioned, that this contractual change a couple years ago on this one individual contract, but there could be, something as we look out to the future, as we continue to deal with weather interruptions and challenges, that if those contractual situations become more standardized, a parametric solution can fit in perfectly to meet some of those exposures from a contract perspective. So a bit of an awareness piece in terms of understanding how that might change. And another really exciting thing to look out for the future, Obviously, we were talking about those 5 perils that Zurich's parametric solution brings, but also looking to expand the product in the future around some human element exposures. So think of extreme heat or air quality. Examples go back to the fires in Canada, a few years ago that created some substantial smoke in and around the Northeast, where projects were delayed because it was not safe to deploy individuals to that project site. So we're constantly looking at how to continue to evolve the product, and that's one area where we would like to take the product to provide more human element indemnity if, from a health and safety perspective, it doesn't make sense to deploy workers that day. That's going to be a down day. There's going to be cost associated with that. So how can we tailor this parametric solution to potentially provide indemnity from that perspective to dovetail not just with the built-as risk, but potentially other lines of insurance like workers' compensation?
Yeah, and Patrick, I'd go back and definitely validate your first point there. I would encourage people to reach out and learn more about the product, because we had done a little research on it. We talked to you before. I thought I really kind of understood it, and then recently you sent over a fact sheet, and I was kind of looking at it, and the coverage is a lot more nuanced and customizable, I think, than even I anticipated. So definitely encourage people to reach out and learn more about it as a product and how it does. It's a well coordinated product with other coverages, and really look to see the advantages that your parametric policy provides.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. And I think it's highly customizable, but it is not complex. I mean, it is a very simple 4-page policy. I think a lot of our insureds would love to hear, less words on a policy. So it's a very simple policy, but the clients can tailor, to your point, single perils. They can buy just wind. They can buy multiple perils if they view exposures changing over the course of a construction project. They can also buy the same peril at different points in the project as well. So, but the peril underlying triggers, it is literally as simple as, take heat for a project. If the weather that day exceeds a certain temperature in Fahrenheit, the policy pays. It's really as simple as that. And so that's a very, the customizable ability does allow a ton of flexibility, but at its heart, it's an incredibly simple product. And that's where I'd really hope to employ confidence in those seeking to learn more, that it's not complex. It's a very streamlined, not only policy delivery system, but insuring agreement from a claims payment perspective. And then the claim payout being a very quick turn per expectation is very unique.
Yeah, and I wish, going back to 25 years, I wish the product existed back then, because I spent a lot of days slogging around, wet job sites where it rained for 3 weeks straight, or even doing a lot of, precast picks or curtain wall picks where it's like we're just standing down waiting on the wind, and, it would have been a very, very valuable product earlier in my career. I wish it existed then, but
and that's a really good point, Chris, because we've had those exact conversations with contractors. We've had an opportunity to present out multiple quotes and scenarios with the same organization for different experiences, and we always have that opportunity if there's a decision to not purchase the product to look back on what could have paid. And frankly, we've got some pretty strong examples, particularly when it comes to summer heat waves or things, particularly in the South. I think back to the Texas, the DFW Metroplex area, which had months of over 100-degree weather last summer. We look back at actually some of those projects that we modeled and can actually quantify, here's where the policy would have paid, and here's where you would have had access to indemnity. So I like that point, Chris, of like, we wish we would have had it. We hear that a lot, and so we really employ contractors, owners to think about that. And hindsight's 2020, but it's a really great solution, to think about as well, especially when you consider the cost efficiency of the product as it stands. We're talking much different levels of cost, in and around that 0.01 to 0.04 per mil range, which is significantly less than like $10,000 to $40,000 per million in cover. So it only has a $5,000 minimum premium. So the cost access or barriers to entry are much lower than comparable products.
Well, given that, if we do have listeners out there who are looking to make a change, maybe implement the product, what's action item number one? What's the starting place?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a first and foremost reach out to Zurich construction property underwriter. All construction property underwriters are empowered to deploy this product. And in terms of some of the nuts and bolts, a lot of the information that we need is the exact information that's supplied with the build-a-trust submission. So it's project location, description, term, schedule, etc. And then we have a very simple application that walks the client through which perils they would like to buy, at which trigger levels they have the option to select, and then we simply model. It's a very model intensive per se, in that we model the location based on the parameters of the project, the term of the project, the term of when the client wants those perils to be covered. And then the model returns those results, and we very transparently share the different types of impacts that deductibles may have, that coverage limits might have, as well as the different probability levels we'll have on a very nice little grid chart, and then have that conversation. So for clients out there, I'd ask them to ask their broker today, heard about this parametric solution, can you give me more information? And then for those brokers that are listening, to engage and ask with pretty basic information in order to get a rough indication, and then start the process from a conversation of that learning journey and how it can be a new and unique solution.
And it sounds like you're pretty much, the timing is as soon as you have the project facts and you have the contract, at least at the bid stage, proposed contract, that's when they should be reaching out, just in terms of timing.
That's where we've seen the most success, when those general contractors are including the estimate of the quote within their actual bids versus potentially having to go back to the owner afterwards. And that's where we've seen some competitive improvement in bids, and really some good opportunities when you can have that conversation at that level, and making sure that the cost is included up front is really important. And then when we're talking about, like I mentioned, the cost earlier, it's really a small line item when it comes to insurance, particularly on certain types of projects when you're looking at the solution. So that's where my encouragement would be, do it at that bid stage, and include it at that point in the process.
Gotcha. Well, Patrick, before we let you go, we'll hit you with a few more just quick rapid fire questions. Yep. But I guess moving forward, what's next for Parametric Insurance, at least for Zurich? It seems to be very accessible and kind of custom made, and tailored very well around the actual, perils for construction projects that really haven't been addressed before, but always seem to be problematic. So what's next for Parametric Insurance? Where do you go from here?
Yeah, I definitely think that there will be a broadened awareness around the solutioning as traditional insurance becomes more and more difficult on certain projects and certain areas of the country with the changing weather patterns. I do believe the future of parametric will become more apparent in terms of the risk purchasing thought process for clients, and for clients to be kind of on the cutting edge of understanding how these solutions work. And if contractual situations change in the future, like I mentioned, this parametric solution, is already there, available for those opportunities, and then also those human element aspects of it. So I'm very bullish around the future of how parametric can perform within some of the challenges that we're facing within the insurance market when it comes to both severe weather as well as routine weather that's changing over time in different parts of the country. So really that's where I think it'll go, and where I hope it will go is more engagement, really at that quotation level of truly understanding and having those broker underwriter client conversations from a consultative perspective more and more frequently, as an opportunity to bring something new and unique to the table.
Yeah, and Patrick, something that stands out to me is the weather patterns. Excuse me. It seems to be, no matter where you are in the country, things are shifting, right? So How important is it that we as an industry don't ignore that, and we kind of continue to evolve our projects and our bidding stage with that weather change?
It's critical to the success of the future. When we talk about building resiliency, when we talk about, look at the hurricane forecast this year is expected to be well above average of 17 to 25 hurricanes, with roughly half of those estimated to actually make landfall. That's kind of, what we look at every year. But what's different is the routine nature that we're seeing in what we refer to as severe convective storm or secondary NatCat perils. So think of things like tornado, hail, straight line winds, such as derechos. Those types of events are becoming more prevalent within experiences of carriers and damage to projects. So it's critical that we're all turning an eye in terms of how to build in resiliency to not only at the building and the design level, but also through the insurance mechanism, and understanding that these issues will continue into the future. And as an industry, both brokers, clients, and underwriters together, understanding how to create a sustainable future and what that might mean from a terms and conditions perspective.
Absolutely. Well, Patrick, we've covered a lot of ground today, but we certainly didn't hit it all. Is there something that maybe we should have asked you about that we didn't get a chance to hit today?
I think that's a great question. I don't believe you did. I hope, obviously, from a high level perspective, this was interesting. And again, if there's anyone who's listening, and this sparks an interest, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or any one of my leadership team or underwriters within the team. We've all become very well versed in the Zurich Weather Parametric solution and how it can apply to different projects. And I most appreciate the fact of what do we do next, and I would say get a quote and let's talk about it.
Excellent. And now, Patrick, finally, the last question, and sometimes the most important question. This is the Building Bite. So, building insurance technology with the experts. You are today's expert. Way taking a bite at it today. I know in the past you gave us a great spot in Texas. What's the new spot for you? Where are you going to go for lunch today?
Oh, that is a good question. I don't think I have any lunch plans today, but my mind goes to we're taking the family to Florida on Saturday, so I've got a ton of spots down already planned for some great seafood, hopefully each and every day. So I joke, my wife and I will enjoy some great seafood. We'll try to get the kids to eat some seafood, but it'll probably be more like French fries and chicken nuggets for them.
Well, you just bread the fish and like chicken nuggets. Like
there you go. We'll tell them
it's the Florida chicken nugget.
There you go. That'll be a takeaway for me today. That's one of my strategies. It's just a different tasting chicken nugget.
Always great to take the kids somewhere else for exotic chicken nuggets, in Florida instead of at home. It just hits differently.
I did not expect to speak about chicken nuggets today. So.
Well, Patrick, thank you for taking the time out to talk with us today. If our listeners do kind of want to take that first step and hook up with you and have questions about the Parametric Policy, where's the best place for them to get a hold of you? Where can they find you following the podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. My email is patrick.mcbride@zurichna.com. Feel free to shoot me a direct email, and I can loop you together with the respective leader within the broker's territory, or, of course, on LinkedIn at Patrick McBride. So happy to take any and all inquiries and address them accordingly.
Fantastic. Thank you again, Patrick, for taking the time. Great to have you on again. We're going to have to get another update next year, I think, just as this policy continues to evolve and get more interesting. But definitely appreciate you coming back to join us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Greatly enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to The Building Bite. This podcast has been brought to you by Proactive. Check us out on thebuildingbite.com, where you can subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on social media for all future The Building Bite news and updates. You can also find us on your favorite apps, including Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, and Amazon. If you have ideas for episode topics that we should cover on the show, or you know somebody who would be a perfect guest, let us know at connect@thebuildingbite.com.